BP added more than $70 billion to the U.S. economy last year by making investments from coast to coast. Investments like acquiring America's largest biogas producer, Archaea Energy, and starting up new infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
The stress and crowds of holiday shopping can put a damper on your holiday spirit, and you don't always find all the perfect gifts you're looking for. The Virginia Lottery's games make easy and tremendously fun gifts for all the adults in your life, even you. Spruce up your gift-giving game this holiday season with the Virginia Lottery. The Virginia Lottery's holiday scratchers are a gift any adult will love. Treat yourself to some winter wonderment and play the lottery's holiday online instant games from anywhere in Virginia. Visit valottery.com/holiday. Please gift responsibly. Lottery games are not for minors. Have you heard? You can listen to your gripping investigations ad-free. Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. That's amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. And catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Content warning, this episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
So as we all know, this week we have spent a lot of time talking about the Franks Memorandum that Richard Allen's defense team filed with the court on Monday morning. One person who figured prominently in that filing was a man named Todd Click.
Todd Click is listed in the memorandum as the former assistant police chief of Rushville, Indiana, which is to the south of Delphi by quite a bit. On Google Maps, it's about 2 hours away to the southeast.
And he is listed as one of 3 investigators who sort of spearheaded the theory that the defense presents, namely that the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were the result of a ritual cult slaying. We got very curious, as I imagine you all were, what Mr. Click thinks about the memorandum. We reached out to him, and we actually have a statement that he has given us permission to read.
And we've found that he's actually casting some doubt on the way the defense has characterized the theory.
And we will share his statement with you. First, we want to recap some of what was said about Mr. Click and the theory in the memorandum.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders. Todd Click on the Franks Memorandum. Okay, before we get into exactly what Mr. Click told us in a statement, let's get into how he factors into this very long memorandum dealing with the defense's recent Franks issues that they raised.
Because obviously we've all read this memorandum, but it's a long memorandum.
There's a lot of parts to it. There's a lot of moving pieces here.
And I think, in fairness, maybe a lot of us tend to remember most some of the bigger details and not some of the smaller things.
So Todd Click is listed as one of 3 investigators who the defense characterized as having spearheaded an investigation into a possible quote-unquote Odinist cult. And the other 2 members of that triumvirate are Kevin Murphy, a detective with the state police, and Greg Ferenczi, who is a Terre Haute detective who unfortunately was murdered in a shooting incident a few years ago.
And while we're on that subject, let me briefly note that just very recently, Terre Haute dedicated a statue of Greg Ferenczi.
Yes.
In honor of his memory.
Yeah, it was a very tragic situation. And so Todd Click comes into this, and the defense describes him as the former Rushville assistant police chief, which we understand to be accurate. Here's where the memorandum sort of really gets into Click's role in this. On May 1st, 2023, the state of Indiana, by way of prosecutor Nick McClelland, received a letter from former Rushville assistant police chief Todd Click, now retired. As stated in the previous paragraph, Click, Murphy, and Ferenczi were 3 of the law enforcement officers who worked on the Delphi murder case, particularly focused on the Odinite angle as it intersected with suspects in Rushville, Indiana. After reading Richard Allen's probable cause affidavit, Click became concerned that the information contained in Richard Allen's affidavit pointing the finger at Richard Allen was far less compelling than the totality of information that Detective Ferenczi, Detective Murphy, and Officer Click had accumulated during the Rushville portion of the investigation. The information that Murphy, Ferenczi, and Click had gathered during their investigation connected men who practiced Odinism in or near Delphi with another group of men who lived in Rushville, and then connected both groups of men to the murders. Click was concerned that for some reason the leadership of the investigative team had failed to share with Prosecutor McClelland the evidence gathered by Click, Ferenczi, and Murphy. Click's concerns led him to seek out a lawyer to assist him in the drafting of a letter. This letter was then sent to McClelland. So this establishes Click's role. You have 3 investigators who are running down a specific lead in Delphi. And if we're all wondering, what's that all about? Well, this was a massive, sprawling investigation, I think it's fair to say. You had a number of leads that we've all heard about because they've reached the media. And what I'm talking about that is specifically leads like Ron Logan. We know from documentation that Ron Logan was looked at extensively in March of 2017 as a suspect. FBI agent Nicole Robertson crafted a search warrant affidavit so they could look at his house and look for different evidence against him. And and
that basically, in fairness, is what you would expect, because the bodies of these murdered children were found on this man's property. So obviously, if they find murder victims on someone's
and
property,
he has a history of abusive behavior to women,
that person is going to be a suspect.
Yeah.
So it would be shocking if they didn't investigate him thoroughly, and they did.
And another lead that comes to mind is, of course, Kegan Kline. He first surfaced in February of 17, then resurfaces in sort of 2019, 2020, and is looked at extensively. So you have different investigators assigned to different leads and tasked with, okay, try to run this down. And that's actually something you see in, again, large investigations. Burger Chef was something similar. In the early days of Burger Chef, you and your partner would be given some sort of like little card with a lead to run down, and you would run it. And if that turned into something maybe worth looking into, you kept running it down. Anything that you're not crossing off the list, you're running down. So it sounds like from what the defense is describing that this is one of those strands. Never made it to the public's attention.
And that also is not unusual. I think it's fair to say that there are a number of potential suspects and leads and angles which investigators in this case pursued vigorously that we, the public, have never heard about.
Yeah. And I imagine that there's probably some people who are like, well, I maybe think my investigation was more salient than the official investigation now, which is, of course, centers around the prosecution of Richard Allen. So you see these things arise when there's a lot of people involved.
And so Todd Click, Murphy, and Ferenczi were investigating this group of alleged Odinists, and they believed that was a strong lead. And so Todd Click writes to McClelland about it.
And so there's some discussion about like discovery issues vis-a-vis there. I'm going to kind of we talked a little bit about those, I think, in the previous episode. Let's just kind of keep it focused on Click himself and delve into a significant document that Click prepared in the case, the defense references. And that is specifically an 85-page compilation of reports by Click that he prepared in 2019, and several videos containing statements that support the defense theory of Richard Allen's innocence that Click prepared in 2019. This 85-page report detailed the investigative work performed by Click, Ferenczi, Murphy, and others, including the FBI. According to the summary of Click's investigation that he attached with his letter, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, of the FBI determined that the individuals responsible for the homicides were involved with Nordic beliefs.
So you mentioned the FBI there. Wasn't there a lot of discussion at some point in the memorandum about the FBI at some point being asked to leave the case? Wasn't that brought up in some of the depositions? Am I remembering that correctly? I've had COVID this week.
There's a footnote on page 10, footnote 8. I'll quote from that. Although State Police Superintendent Doug Carter pulled the plug and kicked the FBI off the Delphi murder case around 2021 over some conflicts, according to Jerry Holman. Holman Depot, pages 123 to 130.
And I highlight that because that's also something that Click mentioned in his statement to us that we'll be sharing with you in a moment.
And in fairness, in that same footnote, it says Tony Liggett, who of course is the sheriff of Carroll County, said he was unaware of anyone kicking the FBI out or any agency being kicked out altogether. So, it's definitely indicating some stressors between agencies potentially, but it's also, I've always been a little bit interested in this BAU angle because just the idea that FBI agents or profilers or whatever are saying, oh, the only people who could have done this would have Nordic beliefs. That doesn't really sound like that doesn't really sound like the kind of language I would expect.
What sort of language would you expect?
Something more, these clues at the scene indicate the possibility of somebody being influenced by Norse religion, Odinism, that sort of thing. Hedging, because it's not like a medical diagnosis. You're not looking at a scene and saying, this serial killer is interested in the occult. That's it. Maybe it's the husband who's trying to make it look like a serial killer who's interested in the occult, right? I mean, like you have to take into account staging, false leads, a mentally disturbed mind. So the certainty with which this is being characterized makes me have some questions, but then again, I don't have the BAU report and I don't have Todd Click's 85-page report. I don't know. Maybe there was something, we're pretty certain about this. I don't know.
I agree with you that if they used the sort of language that's saying, yes, this definitely means this, that would be unusual and not be something I would expect.
And frankly, it seems kind of unhelpful for any investigation if you're doing that, because then you're boxing people in when they have to deal with defense attorneys.
But I do want to make the obvious point that some of the things the FBI did in this case certainly aren't what we would expect. The thing that leaps to my mind is literally on the day of the search of Kagan Klein's home, when the FBI agents on the scene announced that he wasn't involved in the crime.
To the press,
yes.
To the Journal and Courier.
So when we say we wouldn't expect the FBI to do this doesn't mean that the FBI did not do this.
That's true. Yeah. And, that's a very good point.
Okay, well, I'm going to, in just a moment, I will read to you the statement that we got from Todd Click, and then we will talk about it.
At the Murder Sheet, we spend so much time digging into crime stories that sometimes it's difficult to find the time to plan out and cook elaborate, nutritious meals. That's why we are so excited about our sponsor, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Our sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you go to factormeals.com/msheet and use our special code MSHEET, you're not just getting half off this high-quality meal plan. You're supporting us too.
So I'm obsessed with Factor. I had their creamed corn chicken and their tomato basil chicken risotto recently. Both were delicious. That risotto in particular was amazing. Plus, the whole process was a breeze. All I had to do was pop the meal into the microwave. The food was tasty and flavorful, which is no surprise given that each recipe is specifically crafted by chefs and approved by dietitians.
Having Factor during the hectic holiday season has been a boon, especially with us pumping out so many episodes. Head to factormeals.com/msheet and use code MSHEET to get 50% off. That's code MSHEET at factormeals.com/msheet to get 50% off.
Hey listeners, this is Candace DeLong, the host of Killer Psyche. Imagine all your audio entertainment available in just one place. That's what the Audible app is all about. With Audible, you can always find the best of what you love or discover something new. Audible has an incredible selection of mystery and thriller titles and originals like Something Ain't Right by Roger and Zachary Stringer, The Space Within by Greg O'Connor and Josh Fagan, and Moriarty, an Audible original. Membership includes access to Audible originals, podcasts, and tons of audiobooks that you can download or stream as much as you want. And as an Audible member, you can choose one title per month from an ever-growing catalog of titles to keep. The Audible app makes it easy to listen anytime, anywhere, whether you're traveling, working out, doing chores, wherever your day takes you. New members can try Audible now for free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/DLong or text DLong to 500-500.
Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, FDA approved for over 20 years. So, talk to your specialist to see if Botox Cosmetic is right for you.
For full prescribing information, including boxed warning, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
Remember to ask for Botox Cosmetic by name. To see for yourself and learn more, visit BotoxCosmetic.com. That's BotoxCosmetic.com.
In his communications with us, Mr. Click has said very little because he wants to respect the gag order and he wants to make sure that he can say what he wants to say without violating the terms of the gag order, because he takes that very, very seriously. And so he hasn't told us anything of substance apart from what I'm going to read to you. He says he's going to speak with his attorney to find out if the limits of what he is able to say. With that said, I'm going to read to you the following statement from Mr. Click. There are two things that I would like to clear up immediately, though. Detective Ferenczi and Detective Murphy were not Rushville cops. Detective Ferenczi was a detective from the Terre Haute Police Department that was assigned to the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. Detective Murphy was an Indiana State Police detective that was also assigned to the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. So the FBI was associated with the investigation until at least July 2021. Secondly, no one in law enforcement believes Abby and Libby were killed in a ritual sacrifice. That is the defense twisting facts for sensationalism. You can quote me on those two items.
Well, that is a pretty forceful statement. And let me just, in case anyone's confused, let me go back to the portion in the memorandum that summarizes this underneath the header 8 things to know on page 4. Point 1. Members of a pagan Norse religion called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abigail Williams and Liberty German.
And that conclusion seems to be based, at least in part, on the investigation done by Mr. Click and his colleagues. And Mr. Click is saying no one in law enforcement believes Abby and Libby were killed in a ritual sacrifice.
And it's interesting. At first, I was reading it like maybe he means that like current law enforcement who's in control of the case, because Mr. Click is retired. But the fact that he also mentions that the defense is sensationalizing things indicates to me that he's speaking more broadly than that.
Yeah, there would certainly seem to be a subtext that he feels that things are not being presented strictly accurately, in his opinion.
Yes. And that's interesting because I want to, again, read from a portion of this. Murphy, Ferenczi, and Todd Click's dogged pursuit of the truth is what we citizens and those accused of crimes should expect of law enforcement. These honorable law enforcement officers were knocking on doors and conducting interviews, going wherever the evidence led them. So, you know, the memorandum's really, you know, laying it on thick with how great these guys are.
Yes.
And one of the guys is, at least at this point, saying, well, it's sensationalized. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see how this goes. And unfortunately, I mean, tragically, Greg Ferenczi isn't around anymore to say what he thinks. Kevin Murphy, I'd be curious what his take on all of this is. Maybe he has a different one than Todd Click. Maybe it's similar. I don't know. We have not gotten anything from him.
And I would certainly say that it is true that it is important for people to go knock on doors and pursue leads. And I think it was important that this lead be followed up. And it's interesting that one of the people who followed it up says no one believes this was...
I'll be curious if ultimately Click had different opinions than Murphy and Ferenczi on something, or if there's a situation where they think that the trappings were made to look ritualistic, but perhaps the same people are involved, but they're, you know, the defense is going more with the religious angle and the investigators were going more with the angle of drugs, or I don't know, something else. You know, I wouldn't even know, but that's interesting. It raises all sorts of questions, for sure. It's an interesting fork in the road here, because when you read the document, you think, oh wow, okay, they might have a couple of law enforcement people strictly in their camp who are willing to say yes, this is exactly what happened, and Richard Allen's been railroaded, and our suspects were the right ones. This complicates that picture somewhat, I would say.
Yes.
This very much complicates it. I don't think it necessarily states... I'm not reading in the statement that Todd Click is saying, I don't believe in the Odinism thing at all. I'm not reading that at all. But I am reading... I mean, accusing the defense of sensationalizing the theory is interesting.
Yeah, it's very intriguing that this is why he said he wanted to clear it up immediately. We're rushing this episode out. We received this message from him Saturday morning. We're getting this out to you Saturday afternoon. Typically, we don't do episodes on weekends, certainly when we're recovering for COVID. But this is obviously a very important issue, and we think it's important to get as many facts out to you as quickly as possible, so we're all working from the same database.
Now, obviously, we don't have the letter that Todd Click wrote to Nick McClelland, and we don't have his 85-page report, so there's a lot that we don't know here. We don't know the nuances. There may be disagreements here that are minor between Click and the defense. There might be, sounds like there could be some pretty major disagreements, but we don't know how this is necessarily all going to play out. And it certainly doesn't sound like he's necessarily wholly walking back the Odinist angle.
He's basically just saying the defense has sensationalized it. It's also certainly I'm sure we do this too often, compare things to Burger Chef, but there's certainly been times in our work on the Burger Chef case where we become very enamored of a particular theory and we pursue it and say, oh, this must be it. And then later on, as we get more information, perhaps we reassess. And I wonder if that's something that's happened here, that Mr. Click perhaps has continued his investigation and has come up with different conclusions than he might have had 3 or 4 years ago.
I think there's a strong tendency when you're a part of a larger group and everyone gets assigned a specific thing to look at. If you're not able to effectively dismiss your assignment and say it's definitely not this, and you're really working hard on it, I can understand becoming wedded to it on some level, because it's like, this is what I'm eating, sleeping, breathing. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily compromised on it, but it does mean that it's at the forefront of your mind constantly, right?
And I think it's to his credit that he reached out to Prosecutor McClelland to make sure that McClelland knew about this other information that he was concerned that perhaps McClelland didn't know about. That's just doing due diligence. That shows a police officer who cares about the truth.
Yeah, it's at the very least very much caring about it. And I think ultimately the questions for me around this situation still hinge upon, was law enforcement too hasty to cast it aside? That is how defense is characterizing what they did with this lead. They're saying they tossed it out too soon. They didn't give it a chance. Now, the fact that 3 people were working on it diligently and had time to produce a whole report tells me that at the very least, I don't think, obviously work was allowed to be done on this. Like, I don't feel like you'd have those byproducts of this whole investigation if they completely tossed it out on its head early on, like way too early.
And these were not like, this wasn't like a lead they assigned to interns.
No.
This was a lead they assigned. Well, I don't know how these people got it, but this was a lead that was pursued by qualified police officers.
So I question the defense's...
Click, Ferenczi, and Murphy are all skilled investigators.
So I question the defense's characterization on that front. That being said, the defense may turn out to be correct in that, yes, it was allowed to get going, but it didn't finish cooking. Like, they took it out of the oven too early or whatever. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. It's not... we can't know that just from having the memorandum. But what level of due diligence was existing here. So I think that's where I remain open-minded and interested in seeing what develops from there. And then the other aspect of it, is that ultimately, if you don't have the ability to get probable cause for a suspect or a theory, then there's nothing, that's it. Like, if you can't get there, if you have a lot of smoke and a lot of, ooh, this guy's pretty creepy, but you don't have anything tying them to the murders directly, that's not lack of due diligence. You just can't go forward with that. You can't just start arresting people and forcing them to confess. You can't just start arresting people if there's not enough there.
Before we wrap up, I just want to say again that a statue in honor of Greg Ferenczi was recently unveiled in Terre Haute. I wanted to mention that Mr. Ferenczi's sister is supporting a nonprofit called Project Never Broken, which was created to honor Mr. Ferenczi's legacy. And if you are interested in finding out more about Project Never Broken, you can visit projectneverbroken.org. Detective Ferenczi died in very tragic circumstances. He was ambushed. It's a very sad story, and it's our hearts go out to his family, and I'm glad that the community he served honored him with a statue. And if you are interested, again, projectneverbroken.org.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.